Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 701, and today is October 30th, 2024. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. A lot of news to cover on today's show, so I'm going to jump right into it. Just want to mention first where you can find the show if you want to share or subscribe. So if you're a new listener, be sure you subscribe to the show somewhere. If you're a returning listener, put it out there either in your social media feeds or give it to somebody as a recommendation. Help us grow our audience. The show is hosted at the Libertarian Institute. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show. It's up anywhere you could listen to audio podcasts. And of course, follow me on Twitter at KyleAnzalone_ for all my work. All right, starting off the show today with some pretty alarming stories. Russia launches new nuclear drill simulating retaliatory strikes. So Russian President Vladimir Putin announced on Tuesday that Russia was conducting nuclear deterrence drills that involved the firing of missiles from the land, air, and sea. So according to the Kremlin's website, today we are conducting a regular training exercise for our strategic deterrent forces. This exercise will involve practicing the procedures for officials in managing the use of nuclear weapons, including practical launch of ballistic and cruise missiles. So the Russian defense minister said the drills simulated the strategic offensive forces launching the massive nuclear strikes in response to nuclear strikes by the enemy. Putin said that it was important for Russia's strategic forces to be in a state of constant readiness in light of escalating geopolitical tensions and the emergence of new existential threats and risk. The Russian drills come a few days after NATO concluded its annual nuclear drills, known as Steadfast Noon. The exercises were conducted over Belgium and the Netherlands and airspace over Denmark, the UK, and the North Sea. So, NATO said in a press release, this training involved 13 allied countries, approximately 2,000 military personnel, and more than 60 aircraft, including nuclear-capable jets, bombers, and fighter escorts. Refueling aircraft and planes capable of reconnaissance and electronic warfare also took part in the exercise designed to ensure the strength and credibility of NATO's nuclear deterrent. So that was the NATO statement. The NATO and Russia nuclear drills come amid soaring tensions between the two nuclear-armed powers. Putin recently ordered changes to the Russian nuclear doctrine to lower the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons in direct response to the U.S. continuing to support long-range strikes inside Russian territory with NATO missiles. So that would be coming from Ukraine. Now, on to the war in Ukraine. Kremlin says German arms factories opened in Ukraine is a legitimate target. So this is something that the U.S. and its allies have been talking about doing throughout the war. And I always thought it sounded kind of stupid, and I never really thought it would come to fruition just because how are you going to open defense factories in the middle of a war when you don't have air superiority over your airspace? You know, if you can't prevent Russia from hitting your, say, energy infrastructure, how are you going to prevent them from destroying these plants? And why invest all the capital into building these? Because eventually it's just going to be blown up, which is what the Kremlin is saying. So the Kremlin said on Tuesday that a factory in Ukraine that was opened by the German arms maker could become a target for the Russian military. When asked if Russia consider the factory a legitimate target, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov replied it certainly is. The German arms maker opened the factory this month, and it will focus on the production and maintenance of armored vehicles. The CEO of the company said the goal is to produce a batch of Lynx infantry fighting vehicles by the end of the year. The German arms maker has said it plans to open a total of 4 factories in Ukraine, despite Russian threats to target them. The other 3 factories include facilities to produce gunpowder, tank ammunition, and air defense systems. Other Western arms makers looking to cash in on the proxy war have announced plans to open up factories or help to facilitate the production of weapons inside Ukraine, helping to build Ukraine's military-industrial complex as one of NATO's long-term goals. The U.S. is also spending money to help produce weapons inside Ukraine. Last week, Ukrainian President Zelensky said the U.S. agreed to provide $800 million for the production of long-range drones, which can be used to hit targets deep inside Russian territory. I think one of the concerns here that is if this plant does get blown up, it's going to be used by Ukraine to push for two things. One, the ability to hit targets deep inside Russian territory with NATO weapons. And two, for NATO countries to provide air defense capabilities to Ukraine, not just inside Ukrainian territory, but rather inside Poland and Romania, where they fire their interceptors across the border to shoot down these Russian missiles. Very dangerous, but I could see these things becoming an argument if they want to try to set up factories somewhere where they do have a little bit of air defense protection. And obviously that can't happen anywhere inside Ukraine without the help of Western countries, likely shooting down those missiles from their own territory. All right, next up here, moving over to Gaza, at least 115 killed, Palestinians killed by Israeli strikes in Gaza. So at least 115 Palestinians were killed by Israeli strikes in the Gaza Strip on Tuesday. Medical sources told Wafa the vast majority being killed by an attack on an apartment building in Bet Lahana, northern Gaza. The medical sources said that at least 109 Palestinians, including many women and children, were killed by the strikes in the building in northern Gaza. Earlier reports put the death toll at 93, including 25 children. Middle East Eye said that the 5-story building was owned by the Abu Nasser family, who recently took in many displaced Palestinians. At the same time, it is estimated that 300 to 400 people were sleeping at the time of the strike. It is estimated that 300 to 400 people were sleeping in the building. Many of the people wounded in the strike were dying due to a lack of medical resources in the area, which has been under a total siege since early October, as Israel is attempting to carry out an ethnic cleansing plan in northern Gaza. The nearby hospital was recently attacked by Israeli forces and is unable to treat the wounded. So, the hospital's director told Al Jazeera, "We cannot treat the wounded from the massacre due to a lack of resources. Most of the injured may die due to a lack of resources. The world must act and must not watch this genocide in Gaza." So the massacre was bad enough for the U.S. to say it was concerned about the attack, but there's no sign that it will impact U.S. aid for Israel. The State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said, "We are deeply concerned by the loss of civilian life in this incident. This was a horrifying incident with a horrifying result." And he acknowledged that 24 children were killed in the strike. As usual, though, Miller said the U.S. would ask the government of Israel about the incident and instead of calling for any kind of serious accountability, saying, "We have reached out to the government of Israel to ask what happened here." Israeli strikes were also reported in Gaza City and in the southern city of Rafah. Gaza's health ministry said in its daily update that 41 Palestinians were killed in the 24-hour period, bringing the toll to 43,061. At the same time, it said 93 were killed or missing in the strike in northern Gaza. So obviously the health ministry numbers are an official toll. These are the bodies that they received, the people that they know are dead, where there's people that just due to a lack of resources, they can't make it to a hospital. And so their deaths aren't getting counted in these official reports, although, we do know about them because of the reporting and statements from people in northern Gaza. All right. Next up here, Hezbollah appoints its former deputy as new leader. So Hezbollah announced on Tuesday that it appointed Sheikh Naim Qassem as the successor to Hassan Nasrallah, as the group's late leader was killed by an Israeli airstrike on December 27th. So according to the Cradle, Qassem has been involved in Hezbollah since the 1980s and has been Hezbollah's deputy secretary general since 1991. So the statement said, in accordance with the approved mechanism for electing secretary general, Hezbollah's Sharia Council agreed to elect His Eminence Sheikh Naim Qassem as secretary general of Hezbollah, carrying the blessed banner in this journey and asking God Almighty to guide him in his noble mission of leading Hezbollah and the Islamic resistance. So the Israeli defense minister, Yoav Gallant, threatened the new Secretary General's life after the news of the appointment. Gallant wrote on X, said temporary, not for long, with his picture. Qasim's appointment comes amid Israeli media reports that suggest Israel might be looking for a ceasefire deal in Lebanon. Haaretz reported that the Israeli military establishment supports advancing ceasefire negotiations, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was expected to convene a meeting on the issue on Tuesday. Haaretz said the Israeli military campaign in Lebanon is expected to wind down soon. However, the report also said that Israel's demand for a ceasefire would be for the Israeli military to have operational freedom in southern Lebanon to enforce a truce, which is likely a non-starter for Hezbollah and the Lebanese government. While Israeli airstrikes have decimated Hezbollah's leadership and killed thousands of Lebanese, mainly civilians, Israeli troops on the ground fighting in southern Lebanon has faced stiff resistance. In about 3 weeks, 32 Israeli troops at least have been killed in the fighting, which is not an insignificant number. So what we've seen Israel do in Lebanon is, this invasion they pushed in, which doesn't seem to have a whole lot of impact. I mean, they're fighting Hezbollah here and there. They're taking losses. They're getting into it with the UN. They're firing on the UN, destroying UN peacekeeper facilities, gassing UN peacekeepers. And at the same time, they are just decimating areas, civilian areas of Lebanon with airstrikes. So this one from Jason Ditz, antiwar.com. 10 civilians, mostly women and children, killed in Israeli attack on Lebanese coastal town. So Israeli strikes continued against southern coast of Lebanon today, hitting the small coastal town of Sarfand. The town's mayor reported at least 10 civilians had been killed, nearly all women and children. The Lebanese health ministry reported a lower death toll earlier in the day, but added that rescue operations were still underway. The ministry said that at least 21 other civilians were wounded in the attack. Israel, of course, did not comment on the attack. The IDF has a general policy of not commenting on Israeli strikes, first reported in the foreign media, which includes virtually all Israeli strikes against civilian targets. Israeli attacks are taking place throughout Lebanon and have killed thousands. Israel has also issued mass evacuation orders affecting many highly populated areas of the country. Over a million people have been displaced by those orders. Later on Tuesday evening, Israel carried out a follow attack in the same area, this time hitting a nearby town, killing 5 other civilians. 33 were also wounded in that attack. And as the health ministry advises, these are preliminary numbers and they are likely to climb. The second attack was the target of a previous strike on Sunday, with a number of civilians killed then as well. The strike was noteworthy because the town was not listed in any of Israel's many evacuation orders, but that does not seem to stop the IDF from hitting the civilian targets anyways. All right, next up here, this is my newsletter for the Libertarian Institute. You can sign up for this at thelibertarianinstitute.org. It's on the homepage. Just sign up for our newsletter there. Are Israel and the U.S. pushing Iran to make nukes? For decades, hawks in Washington and Tel Aviv have crowed that Tehran is on the verge of obtaining nuclear weapons. And for that entire time, Iran has not been making nukes. Rather, it has limited its nuclear program to produce energy and medicine. However, over the past 6 months, Tehran has suffered humiliation. Over the past 6 years, Tehran has suffered humiliation and attacks from Tel Aviv and Washington. In just the past year, Israel blew up an Iranian diplomat building in Syria, then assassinated a political figure who was in Tehran attending the presidential inauguration. Over the past 2 decades, Tehran has also seen disparity in outcomes between leaders who develop nuke and those who do not. Libya and Iraq gave up their nuclear programs, and Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi ended up dead. Meanwhile, the Kim family retains firm control over Pyongyang and possesses a handful of nuclear weapons. Now, real policy analysts and Iran experts such as Trita Parsi are saying that for Tehran, weaponizing its nuclear program is becoming a more appealing option. He told CNN the trajectory and momentum are with those who are saying that if Iran actually had nuclear deterrence, this would not be happening. I'm not saying that Iran is currently making nuclear weapons or Tehran has made the decision to make nuclear weapons. The U.S. intelligence community makes the same assessment, and in this case, I believe them. However, with each Israeli and American attack or additional sanction on Iran, the nuclear weapons pathway must grow more and more appealing. And the reason that I wanted to write this and thought this was important is, in 2022, in the lead up to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there were a lot of people who reacted by saying, oh, this is war state propaganda. Putin isn't going to do this. And it ended up happening. And I think we have to realize that, you only get to push these countries so far. And then they do start to do the things that the warhawks said that they were going to do, but only because they've been backed completely into a corner. Now, I'm not sure that Iran is there yet, and that this latest Israeli attack on Iran is enough to push Tehran over the limit and go ahead and make and pursue nuclear weapons. However, again, the voices who are saying if we had nuclear weapons, well, Kim Jong-un doesn't come under fire, and we do. Pyongyang doesn't suffer assassinations in its capital city, and we do. So why are we putting up with this? Why don't we nuclearize our nuclear energy program? And again, I think that with each attack, with the more hostilities going on, this has to sound more and more appealing to Iran. I think for a long time, Iran asserted that it had different sets of deterrence abilities, including Hezbollah's capabilities in Lebanon and their ability to strike Israel or American targets in the Middle East. But that hasn't stopped the Americans and the Israelis from going after Iran time and time again. And look, if you look at either President Harris or President Trump likely coming in here, doesn't seem like either of them are willing to de-escalate the situation with Iran. And so again, Iran needs to calculate that they're going to face an aggressive policy from Washington for at least 4.5 more years at this point. And so what kind of calculations does that regime make to think that what does it need for survival? Now, maybe they feel that they have a latent nuclear deterrent, meaning that while they don't have the components to make a nuclear weapon, essentially, and I'm not a nuclear scientist here, but once you're able to refine the spent nuclear fuel, enrich your nuclear fuel to 60%, then going up to 90 or 95% is just a matter of essentially time and working the material more. Is not that they need any other new scientific developments to actually get to the point where they would have all the components to make a bomb. Now, putting all to that together and making a bomb is obviously another pretty big scientific achievement, and only, I guess, 9 countries in the world have ever, or 10 with South Africa, have ever done so. And so I'm not sure that, just having all the components would even be enough. They may have to make and test a nuclear weapon, but this is something that I'm sure is being considered more and more seriously in Tehran. Now, the Iranian government does have a religious dictate, a fatwa against developing nuclear weapons. And so, it's not impossible. And people point to the Iran-Iraq war. And I think this is a good example where Iran suffered gas attacks at the hands of Saddam Hussein and the Americans, by the way. And they took it on the chin and didn't develop their own chemical weapons and start to fire chemical weapons back at the Iraqis, which they could have done. I mean, it would have been awful, but if you're suffering chemical attacks, then it somewhat made sense to fire those back at the enemy. And so, being committed to their fatwa against weapons of mass destruction through that is some kind of signal that they may retain that in the future. At the same time, my guess is, again, the examples of Libya, Iraq, and North Korea weigh very heavily on the decision making in Tehran when trying to dismiss the idea of making nuclear weapons. All right, last up here today, Iran says it will exercise right of self-defense at the right time and place. So amid speculation whether Iran will respond to Israel's recent airstrikes on Iranian territory, a spokesperson for the Iranian government said Tuesday that Iran had a legitimate right to self-defense and warned it will exercise that right at the appropriate time and place. So a day earlier, an advisor to the supreme leader of Iran, the Ayatollah, downplayed the Israeli attack on Iran, saying it was much to do about nothing. He said Israel was trying to start a regional war, saying that it has the potential to set the volatile Middle East region on fire and create the spark that would ignite the regional powder keg. The Israeli strikes on Iran were launched early Saturday morning and killed 4 Iranian soldiers and 1 civilian. Iran has downplayed the damage that was done to its air defenses, saying everything has been repaired, while Western media reports say some air defense systems were completely destroyed. An Iranian government spokesman said the Israeli attack was an attempt to distract from Israel's failures in Gaza and Lebanon. She said on Iranian press TV, the Zionist regime mistakenly in thinking it can disrupt the unity of the Iranian people with such actions. It fails to realize such actions only strengthen our national solidarity. The spokesman also said that Iran will be increasing its military budget by 200% to build up its defenses. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, or SPIRI, Iran spent $10.3 billion on its military in 2023, and the new budget is expected to be finalized by the Iranian parliament in March of 2025. This spokesperson made clear that the plans are to significantly increase the military budget was a response to the Israeli aggression. And so we will see what Iran does here. From all the statements I'm seeing from the Iranian government, I don't think they're going to respond, or if they do, it's not going to be a major response, and it could even be outside of Israel. And so that would certainly at least give the pathway to finally end the tit for tat between Israel and Iran. However, I think, we're going to be essentially with the pot sitting at a near boil until Israel ends its operations in Lebanon and Gaza. And the situation in Gaza has something, stable seems, too far off in the future, but the people there can't be languishing and starving on a daily basis. There has to be a real hope for a future, a real possibility for Gaza. If Israel annexes the northern half of the Gaza Strip, then I think it will be probably some years before tensions in the Middle East really die down, including between Israel and Iran. And with either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump entering the White House nets and essentially pledging to go to war with Iran for Israel, this could escalate very quickly. So it is a major, major concern. All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show today. We will be back with more later in the week.